The gunshot cracked through the air as Abigail Porter dashed into the dusty general store, her heart pounding against her ribs like a blacksmith's hammer. It wasn't the first time Sundown Creek had seen trouble, but it was certainly the first time the town's schoolteacher had found herself in the middle of it. Behind her, the sound of hoofbeats grew louder, and through the grimy window she could see 3 riders approaching, their faces shadowed beneath wide-brimmed hats. "Miss Porter," Mr. Holloway, the storekeeper, peered over his spectacles. "What in tarnation, please?" she gasped, clutching at her skirts. "I need somewhere to hide." The door burst open before Mr. Holloway could respond. Abigail whirled around, coming face to face with a tall, broad-shouldered man whose piercing blue eyes stood out against his sun-weathered skin. Despite the revolver holstered at his hip and the grim set of his jaw, there was something about him that didn't match the other 2 men flanking him. "That's her," one of them said, pointing a grimy finger in Abigail's direction. "The schoolmarm who saw us." Abigail backed up against the counter, her fingers searching blindly for anything she could use to defend herself. "I don't want any trouble." "Too late for that," the second man sneered, reaching for his gun. The blue-eyed man moved with surprising speed, his hand shooting out to grab his companion's wrist. "No shooting in town," he said, his voice low and controlled. "We just need to make sure she keeps quiet about what she saw." "And how do you suggest we do that, York?" the first man demanded. York. So that was his name. Abigail committed it to memory, though she wasn't sure why it mattered if these men were about to silence her permanently. "Leave her to me," York replied, his eyes never leaving Abigail's face. "You 2 ride out, I'll catch up." The other men exchanged glances, clearly reluctant to follow his orders, but something in York's demeanor must have convinced them. With muttered curses, they backed out of the store, the jangling of their spurs fading as they mounted their horses. Mr. Holloway had quietly edged toward the shotgun he kept beneath the counter, but York noticed the movement. "Don't," he warned. "I'm not looking to hurt anyone today." "What do you want?" Abigail managed to ask, her voice steadier than she felt. York stepped closer and she caught the scent of leather, horses, and something else, something clean like soap. Not what she'd expected from an outlaw. "You saw us at the Henderson Ranch," he said. "It wasn't a question." Abigail nodded slowly. She had been gathering wildflowers with some of her students when she'd witnessed 3 men riding away from the Henderson place. Minutes later, smoke had begun rising from the barn. She'd hurried the children back to town and sent the sheriff out to investigate, never imagining the men would come looking for her. "I didn't see your face," she said. "Not until now," a muscle twitched in York's jaw. "Well, now you have." He glanced over his shoulder, then back at her. "Listen carefully. Those men think I'm going to threaten you, maybe worse. If you want to live, you'll do exactly as I say." Abigail stiffened. "I won't help criminals escape justice." A flicker of something respect, perhaps, crossed York's features. "I'm not asking you to, I'm telling you to run." "Run," she repeated, confused. "Not now." He lowered his voice further. "Tonight. Pack whatever you can carry and take the evening stage to Willow Creek. Those men won't be satisfied until you're silenced, and I can't hold them off forever." Abigail's mind raced. "Why are you helping me?" York's expression darkened. "You shouldn't trust me, Miss Porter." Their eyes met, and in that moment, Abigail made a decision that would alter the course of her life. "I already do." The corner of his mouth twitched, not quite a smile. "Then God help you." He tipped his hat and backed toward the door. "Remember, evening stage." As quickly as he'd appeared, York was gone, leaving Abigail and Mr. Holloway in stunned silence. "Miss Porter," the storekeeper finally said, "what in heaven's name have you gotten yourself into?" Abigail shook her head, her gaze still fixed on the door. "I'm not entirely sure, Mr. Holloway, but I believe I just met a wolf in wolf's clothing, with the heart of a shepherd." Later that afternoon, Abigail stood in her small room above the schoolhouse, hastily packing her belongings into a carpet bag. Her hands trembled slightly as she folded her modest dresses and tucked away the few pieces of jewelry that had belonged to her mother. Through the window, she could see the sun beginning its descent toward the western horizon. The evening stage would arrive in less than an hour. A soft knock at her door made her jump. "Miss Porter, are you in there?" It was Sheriff Taylor's voice. Abigail quickly closed her carpet bag and pushed it under her bed before opening the door. "Sheriff, what brings you here?" The aging lawman removed his hat, revealing thinning gray hair. "Got word there was some trouble at Holloway's store today, something about men threatening you." "Oh," Abigail feigned nonchalance. "Just a misunderstanding. Everything's fine now." Sheriff Taylor's bushy eyebrows drew together. "Holloway seemed to think you were in real danger, said something about the Henderson Ranch fire." Abigail hesitated. Should she tell him about York's warning? But what if the sheriff tried to stop her from leaving? Or worse, what if he confronted the outlaws and got himself killed? Taylor was a good man, but he was past his prime and no match for hardened criminals. "Mr. Holloway exaggerates," she said finally. "I did see some riders near the Henderson place before the fire, but I couldn't identify them. They came to the store asking questions, that's all." The sheriff studied her face. "You sure that's all it was?" "Positive," Abigail lied, her stomach twisting with guilt. "Now, if you'll excuse me, Sheriff, I have lessons to prepare for tomorrow." After the sheriff left, Abigail retrieved her bag and glanced around the room one last time. This had been her home for 3 years, ever since she'd arrived in Sundown Creek, fresh out of teaching college back east. She'd come west seeking adventure and independence, things a young woman of 22 couldn't easily find in Boston. Now, at 25, she was about to embark on an adventure far more perilous than she'd ever imagined. The stagecoach arrived precisely on schedule. Abigail handed her ticket to the driver and climbed aboard, relieved to find only one other passenger, an elderly woman who smiled kindly as Abigail settled onto the seat across from her. "Traveling alone, dear?" the woman asked. "Yes," Abigail replied, then froze as she spotted 2 familiar figures approaching on horseback, the outlaws who had been with York. The driver cracked his whip and the stage lurched forward. The riders were closing in and Abigail's heart sank. They had discovered her plan. She was trapped. Just as the horsemen drew alongside the coach, shots rang out from somewhere behind them. Both men wheeled their mounts around, hands flying to their weapons. The stagecoach picked up speed, rounding a bend in the road. Through the small window, Abigail caught a glimpse of a lone rider pursuing the outlaws, a man on a black horse, his form unmistakable even in the fading light. York had created a diversion for her escape. "My word," the elderly woman exclaimed, clutching her chest. "What was that about?" "Just some wild boys causing trouble," Abigail said, her voice strained. Nothing to worry about, but she was worried, not just about her own safety but about the mysterious man who had risked his life to help her. Who was York really? And why had he chosen to protect her? The journey to Willow Creek took nearly 6 hours, with one stop to change horses at a remote way station. By the time they arrived, it was well past midnight. The town was dark and quiet, save for a few lamps burning in the windows of the saloon. "Where you headed, miss?" the driver asked as he handed down her carpet bag. Abigail looked around uncertainly. She hadn't thought beyond reaching Willow Creek. "Is there a hotel?" "Widow Jenkins takes in boarders," he said, pointing to a 2-story house across from the church. "Decent place for a lady." Thanking him, Abigail made her way to the house and knocked softly, praying someone would answer despite the late hour. After a few moments, a light appeared in the window and the door creaked open to reveal a plump woman in a nightcap. "Land's sakes, child, what are you doing out at this hour?" the woman asked, ushering Abigail inside without waiting for an answer. "I arrived on the evening stage," Abigail explained. "I was told you might have a room to let." "Indeed I do," Widow Jenkins said, lighting a lamp in the entryway. "Though I wasn't expecting any boarders until next week when the new bank manager arrives." She peered at Abigail curiously. "You're not him, I take it?" Despite her exhaustion and fear, Abigail smiled. "No, madam, I'm a school teacher." It wasn't exactly a lie. Well, schoolteacher or not, you look dead on your feet. Let me show you to a room and we can sort out the particulars in the morning. The room was small but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a rocking chair by the window. As soon as Widow Jenkins bid her good night, Abigail sank onto the bed, not even bothering to undress. She was safe for now, but what would tomorrow bring? And why couldn't she stop thinking about the outlaw with the conscience? Sleep claimed her just as the first hint of dawn appeared on the horizon. Abigail woke to sunlight streaming through the curtains and the smell of coffee wafting up from below. For a moment, she didn't remember where she was or why she was fully dressed on top of the covers. Then it all came rushing back: the outlaws, York's warning, the desperate flight from Sundown Creek. She sat up with a groan, her body stiff from the uncomfortable stagecoach ride and sleeping in her clothes. After washing her face and changing into a fresh dress, she made her way downstairs to find Widow Jenkins bustling about a sunny kitchen. "There she is," the widow said cheerfully. "I was beginning to think you'd sleep straight through to supper. Sit down and have some breakfast while it's hot." Abigail accepted a plate of eggs and biscuits gratefully. "Thank you for your kindness, Mrs. Jenkins. Call me Hattie, dear. Everyone does." She poured Abigail a cup of coffee and sat down across from her. "Now, I don't mean to pry, but a young lady arriving alone in the middle of the night usually has a story to tell. Trouble with a gentleman, perhaps?" "No, nothing like that," Abigail said quickly. "I just needed a change of scenery." Hattie's eyes twinkled knowingly. "Must have been some powerful, boring scenery to make you leave so suddenly." Abigail couldn't help but laugh. "You're very perceptive." "Been running this boarding house for 15 years, Hattie said. "You learn to read people." She sipped her coffee. "Whatever brought you here, you're welcome to stay as long as you need. Willow Creek's a decent town, not as big as some, but we've got most of the necessities." "Is there a school?" Abigail asked, thinking she might find employment. "There is, but I'm afraid Miss Lawson has been teaching there for nearly 30 years. She's not likely to retire anytime soon." Hattie considered for a moment. "Though if you're looking for work, I heard the Danfield Ranch is seeking a governess for their children. 3 little ones, if I recall correctly. A ranch would be the perfect place to hide, isolated yet with enough people around to provide some security. Do you know how I might apply for the position? Mr. Danfield comes to town every Saturday for supplies, today as it happens. I can introduce you if you'd like." By midday, Abigail was seated in Willow Creek's only restaurant, waiting to meet her potential employer. Hattie had helped her press her best dress and had even lent her a pretty cameo brooch to make a good impression. Now, as she watched the townspeople go about their business through the window, Abigail couldn't help but scan each face, half expecting to see the outlaws who had threatened her. Instead, she saw a familiar black horse tied outside the general store across the street. Her heart skipped a beat as York emerged, carrying a burlap sack over his shoulder. He looked different in the daylight, less menacing, though no less commanding. He wore a dark blue shirt and black vest, with his gun belt slung low on his hips. His dark hair was longer than was fashionable, curling slightly at the nape of his neck. Without thinking, Abigail rose from her table and hurried outside. "York," he turned, his expression changing from surprise to alarm in an instant. In 3 long strides he reached her, taking her arm and pulling her into the narrow alley between buildings. "What are you doing here?" he demanded in a hushed voice. "Me, what are you doing here? I thought—" She trailed off, suddenly unsure what she had thought. That he'd ridden off after creating the diversion. That she'd never see him again. York glanced around, making sure they weren't observed. "I wanted to make sure you got away safely. Baxter and Mills aren't the type to give up easily." "Those are the men who were with you," he nodded grimly. "They followed the stage, but I led them on a chase in the opposite direction, lost them in the hills, but they'll pick up your trail eventually." Abigail felt a chill despite the warm day. "So I'm still in danger?" "Yes." His blue eyes searched her face. "I'm sorry about that. If I'd known you were at the Henderson place that day, you wouldn't have been there, or you would have made sure I didn't see you." she challenged. A muscle twitched in his jaw. Both, maybe. Why did you burn down that barn? York looked away. I didn't. That was Baxter's doing. The Hendersons owed money to some people in Redemption Falls. We were just supposed to deliver a warning, but Baxter, he gets carried away. Some people? You mean criminals? Are you working for criminals, Mr. York? His eyes flashed. It's just York. York Raleigh. And what I'm doing isn't your concern. It became my concern when those men threatened to kill me, Abigail retorted, and when you helped me escape. York ran a hand through his hair in frustration. Look, I'm trying to make things right. Just let me help you get somewhere safe, and then you'll never have to see me again. The thought of never seeing him again bothered her more than it should have. I'm meeting someone about a position as a governess at her ranch outside town. If I get the job, I'll be far from the main road. Perhaps that will be safe enough. The Danfield place. When she nodded, he frowned. I know it. It's too close to Redemption Falls. Baxter and Mills ride through that area regularly. Then what do you suggest? I can't keep running forever. I have to make a living somehow. York was quiet for a moment, considering. There's a place further north near the territorial border. My brother has a ranch there. You'd be safe. Your brother, is he also an outlaw? The question slipped out before she could stop it. To her surprise, York's lips curved into a slight smile. No, madam. Zach's the respectable one in the family. Fought for the Union, came west, built himself a decent spread. He could use help with the books. He's terrible with numbers. And he would take me in just like that, a stranger, if I asked him to. York's expression grew serious again. But first, we need to get you out of Willow Creek without attracting attention. Baxter and Mills have friends here. Before Abigail could respond, a voice called her name. She turned to see Hattie approaching with a tall, bearded man in a rancher's clothes. There you are, Hattie exclaimed. I've been looking everywhere. Mr. Danfield is here to meet you. She noticed York and narrowed her eyes slightly. I see you've made a friend already. Abigail felt her cheeks warm. Mr. Danfield, a pleasure to meet you. This is an acquaintance from Sundown Creek. York tipped his hat politely. Just passing through, sir. Miss Porter speaks highly of your ranch. Mr. Danfield looked between them with undisguised curiosity. Always glad to meet friends of potential employees. My wife's eager to have some help with the children's education. Been trying to teach them herself, but with the new baby, it's proving difficult. I would love to meet your family, Abigail said, though her enthusiasm was dampened by York's warning about the ranch's location. York cleared his throat. If you'll excuse me, I have supplies to load. Good day. With a meaningful glance at Abigail, he strode away, leaving her torn between her appointment with Mr. Danfield and the urgent need to continue their conversation. In the end, practicality won out. She accompanied Mr. Danfield to lunch and listened attentively as he described his ranch and children. By the time their meal was finished, she had been offered the position, complete with room, board, and a modest salary. We'll be heading back tomorrow morning if that suits you, Mr. Danfield said as he escorted her back to Hattie's boarding house. My wife will be pleased. She's been hoping for someone young and educated to influence the children. Abigail thanked him and promised to be ready at first light. Once he had gone, she hurried inside, her mind racing. Should she accept the position, despite York's warnings? Or should she trust this man she barely knew, an admitted outlaw, and seek refuge with his brother? She was still debating when a soft tap came at her bedroom window that evening. Startled, she parted the curtains to find York perched precariously on the narrow ledge outside. Are you mad? She whispered, hastily opening the window. You'll break your neck. Not the first time I've climbed up to a lady's window, he said with a hint of mischief, then immediately seemed to regret his words. That came out wrong. I meant, I know what you meant, Abigail interrupted, fighting a smile despite herself. What are you doing here? Checking if you've come to your senses about the Danfield place. He remained half in, half out of the window, apparently mindful of propriety despite his unorthodox entrance. Abigail sat on the edge of her bed. I accepted the position. I start tomorrow. York's expression darkened. That's a mistake. I need work, Mr. Raleigh. I can't just wander from town to town hoping those men don't find me. They will find you at Danfield's. It's only a matter of time. And your solution is to send me to your brother's ranch, a man I've never met in a place I've never been. She shook her head. For all I know, this could be a trap. York looked genuinely hurt by the suggestion. I would never, he stopped, taking a deep breath. You're right not to trust me. I haven't given you much reason to. Abigail studied him in the dim light. Despite his rough appearance and dubious associations, there was something undeniably honorable about York Raleigh, something that made her want to believe him. Tell me the truth, she said softly. All of it. Who are you really? Why are you helping me? York shifted uncomfortably on the ledge. May I come in? This conversation might take a while. Abigail hesitated only briefly before nodding. York climbed through the window with surprising grace for such a large man. He removed his hat but remained standing as if ready to leave at a moment's notice. I was born in Missouri, he began. My father was a horse trader. When the war came, he joined the Confederate Army and was killed at Shiloh. My brother went the other way, enlisted with the Union, left me to look after our mother and sister. How old were you? 16. Not much of a provider, especially in a border state torn apart by the war. His eyes took on a faraway look. I did what I had to do. Ran with some rough men, learned to use a gun, steal what we needed. By the time the war ended, I was wanted in 3 states. Abigail tried to imagine the desperate boy he must have been, forced to become a man too soon. And your family? Mother died of typhoid in 64. My sister married a farmer and moved to Oregon. Zach came home, found me running with outlaws, tried to straighten me out. A rueful smile crossed his face. I wasn't interested in redemption back then, too angry at the world. But now, York met her gaze directly. Now I'm tired of living in the shadows, tired of riding with men who have no honor, no limits. The job at the Henderson place was supposed to be my last. I've saved enough to buy a small stake in Zach's ranch, a fresh start. Why risk that to help me? He looked down at his hat, turning it slowly in his hands. Because when I saw you in that store, standing up to Baxter and Mills without flinching, I remembered what courage looks like. What decency looks like. He raised his eyes to hers again. I couldn't let them hurt you. I still can't. Abigail felt a warmth spreading through her chest that had nothing to do with the summer night. So you're saying I should refuse the Danfield position and go with you to your brother's ranch instead? Yes. He stepped closer, his expression earnest. It's a 3-day ride north, rough country but beautiful. Baxter and Mills wouldn't think to look for you there. And what about you? Would you stay too? Something flashed in his eyes, hope, perhaps. For a while, until I'm sure you're settled and safe. Abigail took a deep breath, weighing her options. The sensible thing would be to decline, to stick with her plan to work for the Danfields. But when had she ever chosen the sensible path? Hadn't she come west seeking adventure? When would we leave? She asked finally. The smile that transformed York's face was worth any risk. Before dawn, pack light. We'll have to ride hard the first day to put distance between us and Willow Creek. I'll need to leave a note for Mr. Danfield, and Hattie, I can't just disappear. York nodded. Say you received word of a family emergency. It's better if no one knows where you've gone. As he turned to leave, Abigail caught his arm. York, thank you for everything. He looked down at her hand on his sleeve, then back to her face. For a moment, she thought he might say something more, might even. But he simply nodded and climbed back out the window, disappearing into the night like a shadow. Abigail closed the window and leaned against it, her heart racing not with fear but with anticipation. She was about to embark on a journey with a man she barely knew, a man with a dangerous past, heading for an uncertain future. By any reasonable standard, it was madness. Yet somehow, it felt exactly right. Dawn was just breaking when Abigail slipped out of Hattie's boarding house. She'd left payment for her stay along with apologetic notes for both Hattie and Mr. Danfield, explaining that a family matter required her immediate attention. The lie left a bitter taste, but York had convinced her that secrecy was their best protection. He was waiting for her at the edge of town, leading 2 horses, his black stallion and a smaller chestnut mare. "She's gentle," he said as he helped Abigail mount, "but sure-footed. She'll serve you well on the journey." Abigail settled into the saddle, grateful for the riding lessons she'd taken as a girl in Boston. "What's her name?" "Penny, for her color." York swung up onto his own horse with practiced ease. "Stay close and tell me if you need to rest." "We've got a long day ahead." They rode north, keeping to less traveled paths and avoiding the main trails whenever possible. York was a quiet companion, alert and watchful, his eyes constantly scanning their surroundings for any sign of pursuit. By midday, they had left the more populated areas behind and were traveling through rugged, pine-covered hills. "Are you holding up all right?" York asked as they stopped by a stream to water the horses. Abigail stretched her stiff muscles, trying not to wince. "I'll manage. It's been some time since I've ridden this far, but I'm tougher than I look." His eyes crinkled at the corners. "I don't doubt that for a second, Miss Porter." "Abigail," she said, "if we're going to be traveling together for 3 days, you might as well use my given name." "Abigail," he repeated, as if testing the feel of it on his tongue. "It suits you." They continued their journey, talking intermittently as they rode. York told her more about his brother's ranch, 600 acres of good grazing land with a stream running through it, a sturdy house built of stone and timber, a small herd of cattle, and some of the finest horses in the territory. "Zach married a schoolteacher," he said. "Sarah, you'll like her. They have 2 boys, 7 and 5. She's been teaching them at home, but she'd welcome your help. And they'll welcome a stranger into their home, just like that." York looked over at her, his expression softening. "You won't be a stranger, you'll be my friend." The word hung between them, laden with unspoken possibilities. As evening approached, York led them to a small clearing sheltered by a stand of cottonwoods. "We'll camp here for the night. There's water nearby and good visibility if anyone approaches." Abigail dismounted stiffly, her legs protesting after hours in the saddle. York noticed her discomfort and offered a sympathetic smile. "First day's always the hardest. It'll get better." He worked efficiently to make camp, unsaddling the horses and setting up a small fire. From his saddlebags he produced jerky, hardtack, and a tin of coffee, hardly a feast. But Abigail was too hungry to complain. As they sat by the fire, the day's last light filtering through the trees, Abigail found herself studying York's profile. In repose, his face was less guarded, revealing a gentleness that his gruff exterior usually concealed. "Why did you become an outlaw?" she asked suddenly. "After the war, I mean. Your brother offered you a different path." York poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks dancing upward. "Pride, I suppose, or stubbornness. Zach had it all figured out: honorable service, a clear conscience, plans for the future. I had blood on my hands and a reputation I couldn't escape." He glanced at her. "Or thought I couldn't. And now I know better. A man can change his stars if he's determined enough." He set the stick down. "Get some sleep. I'll take first watch." Abigail wanted to protest that he needed rest too, but the exhaustion of the day was catching up to her. Using her carpet bag as a pillow and wrapped in the blanket York had provided, she drifted off to the sound of crickets and the soft whisper of wind through the cottonwoods. She woke sometime in the night to find York still sitting by the dying fire, his gun across his knees, his eyes reflecting the glowing embers. "You were supposed to wake me for my turn at watch," she murmured sleepily. He turned, surprised. "You need the rest more than I do." "I'm used to long nights. Still, it's not fair." She sat up, pushing hair from her face. "I'm not some delicate flower that needs protecting." York, his lips twitched. "No, you're not, but you are my responsibility until we reach Zach's place." "I didn't ask to be your responsibility." "No, you didn't." His voice was gentle. "But here we are anyway." Something in his tone made her heart beat faster. In the dim light, with his guard down, York looked younger, more vulnerable. The distance between them seemed at once vast and infinitesimal. A wolf howled somewhere in the distance, breaking the spell. York stood, adding wood to the fire. Try to get more sleep. Dawn's still a few hours off. Abigail lay back down, but sleep eluded her. She was acutely aware of York moving around the camp, checking on the horses, scanning the darkness beyond their small circle of light. For the first time since fleeing Sundown Creek, she felt truly safe. The next day brought more challenging terrain as they moved into higher country. The trail narrowed, sometimes disappearing altogether, forcing them to pick their way carefully along rocky slopes. York rode close beside her, occasionally reaching out to steady her when the path grew treacherous. "Not much further to the pass," he said as they paused to rest the horses. "Once we're through, we'll be in less traveled territory. Safer." Abigail nodded, too breathless from the climb to respond. The view was spectacular, endless waves of forested hills rolling away to the horizon, painted in shades of green and blue. Despite the danger that had forced her from her home, she couldn't help feeling a sense of exhilaration at the wild beauty surrounding them. York watched her taking in the vista, a smile playing at his lips. "Different from Boston, I imagine. Very different. And from Sundown Creek, too." She turned to him. "I never thought I'd see places like this when I came west. Regrets?" Abigail considered the question seriously. "No," she said finally. "Even with everything that's happened, no, there's a freedom here that doesn't exist back east, room to breathe. To become who you're meant to be, not who society says you should be." York's eyes held hers for a long moment. "That's why I could never go back, even if my name was cleared. The East is too confined." They continued their journey, reaching the pass by mid-afternoon. As they started the descent on the other side, York grew visibly more relaxed, as if crossing this natural boundary had truly put them beyond the reach of Baxter and Mills. That night, they camped in a meadow dotted with wildflowers. York had managed to shoot a rabbit, which made a welcome change from jerky and hardtack. As they sat by the fire, sharing the meal, Abigail realized how comfortable she had become in his presence. The wariness she'd felt initially had been replaced by a growing trust and something else, something deeper that she wasn't quite ready to examine. "Tell me about your life before Sundown Creek," York said, breaking the companionable silence. "What made a Boston girl head west to teach in a frontier town?" Abigail smiled at the memory. "Adventure. Independence. My parents died when I was 16, influenza. I went to live with my aunt, who had very definite ideas about how a young lady should behave and who she should marry." "And you disagreed," vehemently. "I wanted to teach, not host tea parties and chase eligible bachelors. When I finished at the normal school, I saw an advertisement for teachers needed in the Western Territories. Higher pay, free housing, the chance to help shape new communities." She shrugged. "It seemed like the perfect escape. Was it? Everything you hoped for?" Abigail thought about her small room above the schoolhouse, her students some eager, some reluctant, the simple rhythm of life in Sundown Creek. "Yes and no, the work was rewarding, but sometimes. Sometimes I felt like I was still living in a cage, just a larger one." York nodded as if he understood perfectly. "That's the trouble with towns, they have too many rules, written and unwritten." "Is that why you prefer the outlaw life? No rules." "There are always rules," he said seriously. "Even among outlaws, maybe especially among outlaws, the difference is who makes them and who enforces them." He set his plate aside. "But that life is behind me now, or will be once we reach Zach's place." Abigail tried to picture York settling down to ranch work, mending fences, branding calves, living by the honest labor of his hands. It wasn't difficult to imagine. Beneath the hardened exterior, she sensed he was a man who valued order and purpose, who had simply lost his way during turbulent times. "Will it be enough?" she asked softly. "After the life you've led," York gazed into the fire. "It has to be. There's no future in what I've been doing, just an early grave or a prison cell." He looked up at her. "And for the first time in years, I find myself wanting a future." The way he said it, the way he looked at her as he spoke, made Abigail's breath catch. Before she could respond, a distant sound drew York's attention. He was on his feet in an instant, hand on his revolver. "What is it?" she whispered. Horses, more than one. He listened intently, then relaxed slightly. They're moving away from us, not toward us, probably just travelers on the main trail. Nevertheless, he kicked dirt over the fire, reducing it to a dim glow. We should be careful, though, no need to advertise our presence. In the semi-darkness, with only starlight illuminating the meadow, Abigail felt a shiver that had nothing to do with fear. York moved closer, his solid presence reassuring. Cold? He asked. A little, she admitted, though it wasn't entirely true. Without hesitation, he removed his coat and placed it around her shoulders. The garment was warm from his body, carrying his scent leather, horses, wood smoke, and that hint of soap she'd noticed when they first met. Better? Yes, thank you. Abigail pulled the coat tighter, oddly moved by the simple gesture of kindness. They sat side by side, watching as clouds drifted across the star-filled sky. For the first time since their journey began, York seemed to truly relax, his shoulders losing their habitual tension, his expression open and unguarded. "Abigail," he said after a while, her name soft on his lips. "There's something I need to tell you." Her pulse quickened. "What is it?" He turned to face her, his features barely visible in the dim light. "When we reached Zach's ranch, a gunshot shattered the night, the bullet striking a tree just inches from where they sat." York reacted with lightning speed, tackling Abigail to the ground and covering her body with his own as more shots rang out. "Stay down," he ordered, drawing his revolver. He fired 2 shots in the direction of their attackers, then pulled Abigail to her feet. "The horses, now." They ran for the picketed animals, bullets kicking up dirt around them. York boosted her onto Penny's back and slapped the mare's flank. "Ride north along the creek bed, I'll be right behind you." Abigail hesitated. "York, go!" He turned, firing again to provide cover. Heart pounding, Abigail urged Penny forward. The mare responded instantly, galloping into the darkness. Behind her, she could hear more gunfire than the thunder of hooves as York followed on his black stallion. They rode hard for what seemed like hours, following the winding creek as it cut through the foothills. Finally, when the horses began to tire, York signaled for her to stop in a dense thicket of pines. "Are you hit?" he asked urgently, dismounting to help her down. "No, you." In the moonlight filtering through the trees, she could see blood on his shirt sleeve. "Just a graze, nothing serious." He led the horses deeper into the thicket. "They've been tracking us, probably picked up our trail yesterday." "Baxter and Mills," York nodded grimly, "and at least one other." "They're determined, I'll give them that." "What do we do now?" He unsaddled the horses, moving with practiced efficiency despite his injury. "Rest the horses for an hour, then push on. We're less than a day's ride from Zach's place. If we can make it there by tomorrow evening, we'll have help." As he worked, Abigail noticed him favoring his left arm. "Let me see that wound." "It's nothing, York." She fixed him with a stern look. "Let me see it." With a resigned sigh, he sat on a fallen log and allowed her to examine his arm. The bullet had indeed only grazed him, but the wound was deep enough to require attention. Abigail tore a strip from her petticoat and used water from York's canteen to clean the injury before binding it tightly. "You make a good nurse," he said, watching her work. "I've had practice." School children are forever getting scrapes and cuts. She tied off the bandage. "There, that should hold until we can have it properly treated." York caught her hand as she started to move away. "Thank you." His voice was rough with emotion. "For trusting me, for coming with me." "I know it wasn't an easy decision." Abigail found herself unable to look away from his intense gaze. "It was easier than you might think." For a heartbeat, it seemed he might pull her closer. Instead, he released her hand and stood. "We should try to get some rest before we move on." They settled beneath the pines, huddled close for warmth and safety. Despite the danger, despite the uncertainty of what lay ahead, Abigail felt an inexplicable sense of peace. With York beside her, she could face whatever came. She drifted into a light sleep, only to be awakened by York's hand gently shaking her shoulder. "It's time," he whispered. They mounted up and continued north, moving more cautiously now, aware that their pursuers could be anywhere in the darkness. As dawn broke, the landscape began to change, the rugged hills giving way to rolling meadows and scattered stands of oak and pine. "Zach's land starts just beyond that ridge," York said as they paused to rest the horses around midday. "Another 3 hours' ride, maybe 4. Relief flooded through Abigail. "Do you think they're still following us?" "Yes." York's expression was grim. "But they won't expect us to have allies. Once we reach the ranch, we'll have a fighting chance." They pressed on, the horses tired but game. York rode close beside Abigail, his eyes constantly scanning their back trail. The tension in his body was palpable, like a coiled spring ready to release. The sun was low on the horizon when they crested a rise, and York reined in his horse. Below them stretched a verdant valley, bisected by a sparkling stream. Near its center stood a large ranch house with several outbuildings, corrals, and fenced pastures where cattle grazed. Smoke rose from the chimney, carrying the promise of safety and comfort. "Raleigh Ranch," York said, a note of pride in his voice. "Home." As they started down the slope, a shot rang out, sending birds scattering from a nearby tree. York's horse reared, and he struggled to control the animal. "They're here," he shouted. "Make for the ranch, don't stop for anything." Abigail urged Penny into a gallop, bent low over the mare's neck as more shots echoed across the valley. York was right beside her, his face set in determination as they raced toward safety. Figures appeared in the distance, men running from the ranch house, rifles in hand. One of them raised his weapon, then lowered it, apparently recognizing York. "Zach," York called out. "We need help." The man, tall and broad-shouldered like York but with lighter hair, signaled to the others, who spread out, taking defensive positions. A bullet whizzed past Abigail's ear, and Penny stumbled, nearly throwing her. York reached over, grabbing her reins to steady the mare as they thundered into the ranch yard. Inside, Zach Raleigh shouted, covering their retreat as York helped Abigail dismount and rushed her toward the house. A woman appeared in the doorway, pretty, with auburn hair pulled back in a practical bun. "York, what on earth? Trouble following us, Sarah. Get the boys to the back room." York ushered Abigail inside, then turned to head back out. "Wait," Abigail caught his arm. "Where are you going?" His eyes met hers, intense and determined. To end this, once and for all. Before she could protest, he was gone, joining his brother and the ranch hands as they exchanged fire with the pursuers. Sarah put a comforting arm around Abigail's shoulders. "Come away from the window. The men will handle this." She led Abigail to the kitchen, where 2 wide-eyed boys peered out from behind a door. "Boys, this is Miss Porter. She's a friend of your Uncle York's." The next hour was the longest of Abigail's life. Sarah kept them all in the kitchen, away from windows, while the sound of gunfire punctuated the gathering dusk. She made tea, speaking in a calm voice about ordinary things, as if outlaws weren't trying to kill them just outside. "York has told us about you in his letters," Sarah said, handing Abigail a steaming cup. "Not by name, of course, but he mentioned a schoolteacher who had shown him kindness." Abigail blinked in surprise. "He wrote about me," Sarah smiled knowingly. "York doesn't form attachments easily. When he does, it means something." She glanced toward the door. "I've never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you." Before Abigail could respond, the door burst open and Zach entered, his face grave. "It's over. Baxter and one of his men are dead, the third got away. And York." Abigail asked, her heart in her throat. Zach's expression softened. "He's fine. Checking on the horses, he'll be in shortly." Relief washed over her like a wave. She sagged against the table, suddenly exhausted now that the danger had passed. Sarah immediately took charge. "Zach, show Miss Porter to the guest room. She needs rest. Boys, help me prepare supper. Everyone will be hungry after all this excitement." The guest room was small but comfortable, with a real bed, the first Abigail had seen in days. After washing away the dust of travel with water from the basin Sarah provided, she sat on the edge of the bed, trying to process everything that had happened. A soft knock at the door roused her from her thoughts. "Come in." York entered, his face weary but relieved. He had changed into a clean shirt and washed, but his eyes still held the intensity of battle. "Are you all right?" he asked, remaining by the door as if uncertain of his welcome. "I should be asking you that," Abigail replied. "You're the one who was shot at, twice." A smile ghosted across his face. "Takes more than a few bullets to keep me down." The smile faded. "Baxter's dead, so is his friend Collins. Mills got away, but he's wounded. Zach thinks he won't make it far, so it's over. We're safe," York nodded slowly. "Yes, you're safe now." He hesitated, then added, "Zach and Sarah want you to stay, as long as you like. Sarah was a teacher before she married. She says you and she have much to talk about." "And what about you?" Abigail asked, rising from the bed to stand before him. "Will you stay too?" Something flickered in his eyes, hope, uncertainty, longing. "That depends." "On what?" "On whether there's a reason for me to stay." He took a step closer. "Abigail, what I was trying to tell you last night before we were interrupted, I've never met anyone like you. Someone who sees the good in people, even when they can't see it in themselves. Someone brave enough to trust when trust hasn't been earned." Abigail's heart pounded. "I think you've earned my trust, York Raleigh, several times over. I want to be worthy of it, of you." His voice was low, intense. "I know I have a past that can't be erased. I know I'm not the kind of man a woman like you should." Abigail closed the distance between them, placing her fingers gently against his lips. "Stop. You don't get to decide what kind of man I should care for." York's breath caught. "And do you care for me?" In answer, Abigail rose on her tiptoes and pressed her lips to his. For a moment he remained still, as if afraid to believe this was real. Then, with a soft groan, he gathered her into his arms, returning her kiss with a tenderness that belied his rugged exterior. When they finally parted, both breathless, York rested his forehead against hers. "I should have done that days ago." Abigail smiled, feeling lighter than she had in years. "We had a few distractions. Outlaws, gunfights, a desperate race across the wilderness. Just another Tuesday in the territories." His eyes crinkled at the corners, and Abigail realized how much she loved seeing him smile. A call from below broke the moment. "Supper's ready." Sarah's voice floated up the stairs. York stepped back reluctantly. "We should go down." "Zach and Sarah will be waiting." He offered his hand. "But this conversation isn't finished." Abigail placed her hand in his, marveling at how natural it felt. "I should hope not, Mr. Raleigh. It's only just beginning." The family dinner that evening was filled with warmth and laughter, a stark contrast to the violence that had preceded it. Zach and York swapped stories from their childhood, while Sarah shared tales of her early teaching days. The boys, initially shy around Abigail, soon warmed to her when she described some of the pranks her students in Sundown Creek had played. As the evening wore on, Abigail found herself watching York the way he interacted with his nephews, the deep respect between him and his brother, the ease with which he fit into this family circle. This was the real York Raleigh, she realized. Not the hard-eyed outlaw she'd first met, but a man of honor and loyalty who had lost his way and fought his way back. Later, as they sat on the porch watching the stars emerge, York took her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "What will you do now?" he asked. "You could teach in the settlement near here, or in Willow Creek, once enough time has passed that no one connects you to what happened." Abigail considered her options. "I think I'd like to stay here for a while." Sarah mentioned she could use help with the boys' education. "And there are other children on neighboring ranches who need schooling." York's face lit up. "You'd stay here at the ranch, if that's all right with you." He lifted her hand to his lips. "More than all right. It's everything I've wanted since the moment you looked me in the eye in that general store and refused to be intimidated." Abigail smiled at the memory. "I was terrified. You didn't show it. That's when I knew you were special." His expression grew serious. "Abigail, I know it's too soon to speak of certain things. We've only known each other a short time, and my past, your past is just that, the past," she interrupted gently. It's the future I'm interested in. The hope that bloomed on his face was beautiful to behold. A future, together. That's what I'm hoping for. She squeezed his hand. Unless you have objections. Instead of answering with words, York drew her into his arms and kissed her beneath the star-filled sky, a kiss that held promises of all that was to come. 6 months later, on a crisp autumn day, Abigail stood before the small church in Willow Creek, York's ring on her finger and his steadfast love in her heart. The journey that had begun in fear had led her to a happiness she'd never imagined possible. As they exchanged vows, York's voice was clear and unwavering. I, York Raleigh, take you, Abigail Porter, to be my lawfully wedded wife. To have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do us part. Abigail blinked back tears as she repeated the words, remembering their first meeting, the desperate flight, the moment she'd realized she was falling in love with a man she should, by all logic, have feared. I now pronounce you husband and wife, the minister declared. You may kiss the bride. As York's lips met hers, sealing their union, Abigail heard the cheers of their friends and family, Zach and Sarah. Their boys, neighbors from surrounding ranches, even Sheriff Taylor from Sundown Creek, who had eventually learned the truth about the Henderson fire and cleared York's name in that matter. Mrs. Raleigh, York murmured against her lips, has a nice ring to it. Indeed it does, Mr. Raleigh. Abigail smiled up at her husband, this man who had risked everything to protect her, who had found redemption in love, who had shown her that the greatest adventures come not from running away, but from finding where you truly belong. As they walked out of the church into the golden autumn sunshine, hand in hand, Abigail remembered that moment in the general store when he had warned her not to trust him, and she had chosen to do so anyway. It had been the best decision of her life. The future stretched before them, as vast and promising as the western horizon, a future they would build together, one day at a time, with trust, courage, and a love that had been forged in the crucible of danger and had emerged unbreakable. Ready for our next adventure? York asked as he helped her into the wagon that would take them back to their ranch, their home. Abigail's heart swelled with love and gratitude. With you, always. And as they rode away toward the setting sun, Abigail knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, the schoolteacher who had sought adventure and the outlaw who had found redemption, united by a love that had begun with a warning and a leap of faith. A love that would last a lifetime,